Fantastic. Good evening, everyone. Uh, Commissioner Shea, would you like me to just jump right into this where we left off? Talking
Uh,
through, I believe we're on section G, or whatever you prefer.
I'll just do a short intro. Welcome, and I need to start the webinar in case there are public participants, which I have. Welcome everyone to Monday, February 12th iteration of the Enabling Ordinance Ad Hoc. We are working through, picking up where we left off with 2.46 and the end of it with Mac, and then we'll be going into 2.47. I will also, after we get through 2.47, I think have a check-in for whether we're going to have a meeting next Monday because it's President's Day holiday and our city employee counterparts do have a holiday on that particular day. And then finally see if there is any word from other council members' offices about our current workflow and timing. Sound like a plan, everyone?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Mac, why don't you take us away? I think we were finishing up with section G on the screen there.
Yep. So where we left off.
Pardon me, I can't really see the screen. So can you identify exactly where we are on 2.46? Thank you.
We're at 2.46.040, which is the duties of the agency director. Previously, we went over the report out to the commission, the different stats that need to be provided, and the information that should be aggregated along with the case-by-case information. And we are on section G, which relates to the budget.
We had a short discussion at the end of our meeting last week talking about this particular addition, item G, and some of the thinking behind it, especially the thinking behind it about the ability of the agency, and later on we'll see the Inspector General, to submit the proposed budget directly to the mayor and city administrator. We had I think just about maybe 2 or 3 minutes of discussion on it. Any thoughts or comments as we wrap up discussion on section G to talk a little bit about this addition of proposing a budget for, or having the agency director propose a budget, having it delivered to the commission, allowing them to submit it directly to the mayor and city administrator, and then the specific prohibition that the commission may not direct or require transferring, deletion, or other alteration of funds and staff positions.
Sorry, Commissioner, can I just jump in here? I know that we're on the agency section, but I think, as we all know, it's February 12th, and I haven't received any of the budget templates or information from finance. I know that that's supposed to be forthcoming. Myself and Director Muir has received that information through other channels. So I think I think that's a little bit the February 1st date. I don't know if we can have a better date or in accordance with the finance department schedule, just because it's just not tenable. I know I had challenges last year when the commission wanted a budget from the OIG, but we didn't have the budget documents from the finance department just yet. So I just don't want there to be an I don't want the commission to have an unrealistic expectation to receive that. You guys haven't received it as of yet, mainly because we can't work on it yet, myself or Director Muir, and I definitely don't want to speak for him.
No, I can say the same, is that I have a budget mapped out, but I don't have the template from the city. And I don't know exactly where the February 1 date came from, other than it makes sense to have it in advance. There's going to be a presentation.
Sorry, for those of us that don't work in the city and aren't familiar, myself included, what are the budget documents that you're talking about that you're waiting on from finance?
So every year, budget comes out with certain budget documents and tools. Usually it's 4 documents. Sometimes it could be either or. There has been fluidity, and I've only been here since 2022, and the documents have changed. So there are certain equity tools that we have to use, and we have to provide measurements. There's also a document that our budget analyst provides us with what is actual budgeted from the mid-cycle, or the actual budget cycle. And then what we have at mid-cycle, we have an FM 750 form, which shows our expenditures and our projections. So we can move certain monies, but we have to be able to see that to provide a budget proposal to our to not only finance, but also to the commission to review. And we just don't have those documents. So it was 4 documents last year that we needed to provide. And then we also have to craft a memo of justification for any moves, adds, deletions. And then if there is a deficit, the city may come and say, you know, you have to decrease your budget by X percentage. But that comes again from the finance department, their directives. So we wouldn't be able to provide that information.
What time did it come last year?
I want to say around this time. I feel like it came a little bit earlier last year, because we had to do, so this is the mid-cycle, and the city does 2-year budget cycle. So that was like a bigger push. So we had a lot of the paperwork and the data a little bit earlier, because everybody had to put in a budget cycle. We had to balance the budget and things of that nature. Mid-cycle, my very first year, I came in on the mid-cycle, and I want to say it came around mid-February. I was still working on it definitely in March. I remember myself and former Director Alton, we were working on it still in March.
I have a few more silly questions, but I see Miss Grenache has her hand up, so I'll let her ask her questions, which are probably a lot better than
like
mine.
me to ask my silly question instead, right? I was just going to suggest that the language just be changed to the proposed budget shall be delivered to the commission upon receipt from the finance department of the appropriate documents, or something to that effect, and just leave out February 1st and make it conditional upon the receipt of the appropriate documentation. Thank you.
I will take that suggestion. We do have a few more questions though before we, but Kathy, Ms. Leonard, as I figure out how to take.
Thank you. So once the documents are received from the budget or from the finance committee, then the OIG and super leads will need a certain period of time afterwards to prepare their budget. So what is that? Is that a month? Is that 2 months? Just something to think about. Thank
Either
you.
one. Who wants to answer?
Director Mayor.
I'll just say, having not gone through this process in full, the budget projections are usually about 2 months. They have about a 2-month delay. So right now, like the most recent projection I can see for our agency's expenditures is as of December 23rd. And I suspect that the finance department and our budget analysts prefer to do this as late as possible so they can more accurately project what our expenditures are going to be and for the current fiscal year and for the following one. So I am dependent on my budget analyst's availability to a certain extent, where if they're out of town for 2 weeks, I'm not proposing a budget. Or if they have an order from the city administrator to wait 2 weeks because we got to figure a financial issue that I'm not aware of, I can't present a budget. So I think that we are not fully in control, and everything that we do from a budgetary perspective is reliant on the Department of Finance and their timetable, which is built around that April 1st date. So I'm just informationally adding that, with an understanding that once we receive those documents, we try to do it as quick as possible. But sometimes there are other bureaucratic impediments.
What's the significance of the April 1st date?
So finance has to get, from what I understand, and I could be, not exactly 100% correct, they have to get all the budgets together, and then have there are meetings that they have. So city administration, city leadership, so the city administrator's office, and then I want to say the mayor. I didn't meet with the city administrator singularly. There were the mayor's office, and then they have meetings with all the departments to have back and forth questions, get some understanding. So after that, they bring that, make sure that the budget is balanced, in a way that, okay, if they say we have to have a 5% decrease, and I submit my budget and I only have 3% decrease, they can kick it back and say, listen, you froze this position, we're proposing that you freeze this position and this position so that you can fulfill the 5% decrease in your budget. That actually happened last year. There was a lot of back and forth. They wanted me to freeze 2 positions, and I said, no, absolutely not. Like, we're a brand new office. So there was a lot of back and forth, a lot of justification, and then I had to kind of rob Peter to pay Paul to still decrease the budget overall, but still give enough operating human capital in the office to get the job done. So again, to Director Muir's point, there are certain directives that come from the legislative bodies and the elected officials that is contingent upon a deficit. And to Director Muir's point, again, we are walking into, from what I've heard, 129 million, and we're talking about mid-cycle. So I either foresee another hiring freeze. I don't know if the commission remembers last year, there was a hiring freeze. So there weren't any layoffs, but we couldn't hire anyone. So what does that look like? If we have some positions that will be made available in the fiscal year, and there are certain projects that we have contingent upon hiring those positions, and there is a hiring freeze, what will we be able to do, and how can we maneuver, and can we provide a memo for justification to say, okay, we have 8 positions, you want us to freeze, can we get 4, and this is the justification for it. There's a lot of back and forth, and Director Muir having to justify what he needs in his department, whether it's resources via O&M, which is like our supply budget, or hardware, software, or people, and what positions those are.
I appreciate that you probably both have budget on the mind, since we're in February and we're moving towards April. But I maybe I missed it. What was the significance of the April 1st date again? Is that the deadline before the negotiations, or?
It's so that the city leadership, finance gets it by that time, and then they can start setting up departmental meetings. So they have to have budgets from the departments, so that the mayor, her team, and leadership, city administrator, and board, their team can sit down and they'll meet and have meetings with departments to say, okay, listen, this is your proposed budget. I see you need X amount here. Is there a way that we can do this? What is the justification for that? You didn't spend this here. And then you have understanding. Those are those meetings. So when you present the budget, meaning departments present their budget and then have to justify that. So that gives the city administration in time to set up those departmental meetings. So then the mayor can put forth her budget, and then city council will then have enough time to stand up their budget committee. I can't remember exactly. They have their core budget folks, and then they get it. So the mayor has hers, presents hers, but then city council has theirs, and they usually come with amendments. So you have to have time to have those council meetings to talk about those amendments. They have to vote on it, and then the budget has to be passed by June. It has to be. It's before June 30th. I know that. I think last year it passed June 26th, I believe.
I imagine that there's a good amount of planning and forethought that go into those documents that you receive from finance, as well as what you eventually will submit for April 1st or at some point to the commission so that they can submit it for April 1st. I wonder how much of that you need the actual finance documents from, because I imagine both of you have some idea right now of what you're hoping for or what you see coming or what's going on. So I suppose the question is, what's the likelihood or the possibility of submitting a rough draft of a proposed budget by February 1st before those documents?
I can just say I'm not necessarily comfortable with that. And I had conversations last year about that because there's so many unknowns when it comes to, I can have a wish list all day and then propose it to the commission. The commission's like, okay, this sounds good. And then the city comes back and says, oh, you know, your budget went from 5 million to 2.5 million. So then there's a lot of unnecessary work. And I can only speak for myself. We're still quite small on the administrative standpoint. So to do a lot of work, or not necessarily a lot of work, but do work on the front end, and then having to keep coming back with iterations, which we'll have to do anyway. I've never submitted my budget documents and something hasn't been kicked back.
I would agree. I think that in practice, I think giving an outline of things that we're considering is one option, but also again, having been through this process, I wouldn't want to publicly disclose my idea and then the budget goes, well, this year they're really frowning on asking for that much for printing. And then I've already started a negotiation on the wrong foot. That's just generally how I'd like to approach each one of these cycles, is learn what is where are opportunities for growth, where should we be more conservative in what we're presenting as early on as possible. But I will also say that the budget analyst tends to guide a lot of the new template information where there are certain projections and just in the mastery of holding budget documents and incorporating, okay, you got a new position and here's an approximate amount for it, or here we're midway through. Like I have multiple job specs that haven't been created and I can't even project the cost until union negotiations are done and I get the budget analyst to sign off on even a placeholder. And those are skills that frankly that office has that way outpace mine. So those are a couple other variables.
IG, before you go, I saw that Vice Chair Daz had her hand up a few times. I just want to double check. Vice Chair, anything to add?
No, I just wanted to emphasize the need to not move faster than the budget office, because that's going to create more work for all of us. So really waiting for those instructions to come in and then figuring out, how we go forward from there would be my business.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate that too, Vice Chair. Sorry, Commissioner.
That's okay. I appreciate it as a person who is not well versed in budgets. And it's part of why I wanted to sort of understand. IG, you had something else?
I do. I think it may be helpful for, I know specifically for myself, again, I don't want to speak for Director Muir, what the commission may be looking for. So if it's just kind of like, are you guys asking for any new positions? I think that's something or do you foresee asking? I think that's a easy ask. versus are you going to ask for more O&M? Are you going to ask for more monies in your training budget? Is there a particular outcome? And I think that last year, that's kind of where they were like position wise, because that's the bulk of, I think, everybody's, myself and the CPRA's budget is the salaries as well as the benefits. That's the bulk of our budget.
Vice Chair.
In response to the IG, I think for me, and I don't want to speak for all of us on the commission, I think it would be helpful to get budget priorities. I am not necessarily interested in like, you know, the dollar amount or that, but what are you focused as the leader of your agency? You know, what is it, more staff? Is it more training? Is it consultants? You know, whatever it may be. So if there's a way for us to understand what the priorities are, the budget priorities, and provide feedback, I would personally find that helpful, but I'll be curious to hear from my colleagues and others if that would be a good use of our time.
Chair, thoughts?
Yeah, I last year, this time on our agenda, we had budget. And I think even the commission submitted a budget with no numbers. And is that the reason why that could happen? That you don't really know whether anything is going to be funded, so you just don't even ask for any money? What? I'm not a budget person, so I don't know how this works either. And I know we did have someone from the finance office come and at least update our budget. But insofar as even preparing our own commission budget, I think we were way out of our experience in preparing a cogent budget that the mayor's office could approve or not approve. So I'm trying to learn as you all speak on what is this process and how do we prepare ourselves as a commission, let alone our support the asks of our direct reports.
IG.
So every year, annually, we all know that we have COLAs, but there's also potentially some different costs associated with our benefits. So
Cost of living adjustments was the COLAs?
Yes, sorry. Cost of living adjustment. So if my budget in the OIG does not change at all as far as the dollar amount, my salaries and benefits will still increase, which means something else will have to decrease because there is a legal obligation for cost of living increases and maybe I don't want to just say, you know, Joe Schmo insurance premiums have now gone up. So now the employees or employers portion has to go up. So now my budget for benefits goes down. So there are things that are unknown. To Director Muir's point, there are numbers, you know, we have a budget for last year for salary and benefits that will be different this year because of these increases or negotiated increases because of the MOUs that we just don't have. I promise you, I have to wait for a budget to do it. They'll do it and be like, okay, you have boom, boom, boom. We just don't have the time to sit down and calculate that. There are certain formulas that they also use on their end. So it's definitely not an easy feat, and there is a lot of nuances with our budgets as well. So, but that's one thing I can say is, you know, we could keep 5 million, but if the salaries and benefits still increase, we don't have that other pot of money anywhere else. It has to be pulled from there to make sure that the salaries and the benefits are in accordance with what was negotiated. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Yes, it is, IG, obviously. Any information on how this process works and what our function is, especially as a commission, vis-a-vis our direct reports is exceptionally important. This is what we're looking at now is CIPRA's, isn't this is CIPRA? Yeah, specific.
This is CIPRA right now. Yep.
Yeah, the proposed budget shall be delivered to the commission. Well, we've already blown that date.
All of these changes are for the future, not for right now.
Yeah, but we've already blown it for this year. Right now, we're way past. So, I could only ask Mac, does this work for you?
Well, I think to the vice chair's point, we can present priorities, potential new positions, right? Because I mean, I could say, here are the new positions on the proposed budget, but I have to know that those are on, and that's part of a negotiation under some circumstances. So, I mean, as a starting point, here's the proposed vision for what we're trying to add and how we're trying to spend this budget is the most I think I could reasonably get by February 1st or 15th, maybe even March 1st of each year. And I think to the IG's point before, when I see this, it's a little up in the air for me for what the goal is on the commission side of, like, is your hope to do a line edit as an entity, as a line edit of the budget and come back with feedback? Are you hoping to say, well, I think you need more intake folks or more, because a lot of even when it comes to consulting, it's going to be jumped up in one or two line items, or jumbled up in one or two line items. So you can't necessarily see how we're planning on spending that money. But I think that if we get a vision for what type of feedback we might receive, we can create a structure that offers that in the most time-effective fashion.
Since you mentioned that, why don't I turn to our community participants and ask them, as a person who's not involved in the day-to-day, but instead sees what's happening either through reports or versus meetings, what are your thoughts about what's being talked about right now? What are your thoughts about budget priorities, perhaps in early February, budgets themselves, when you would like to see them, what you would like to see, etc.? Ms. Leonard, Ms. Grenache. I think our Q&A is also available for anyone who's watching.
Jesse, I am feeling like I don't have the kind of expertise in this that would be helpful. I think I need to defer to those of you who are on the front line in knowing how best to come up with something in writing that is not unduly binding. I think the commissioners need to identify what they would want in submissions from CIPRA and the OIG, so that they can give some feedback before anything really, goes forward to the administration, to know what the priorities of each of the agencies is or are. And I don't have a sense of what the date should be. If March 1st is feasible, then I guess that would be, something to consider. But again, I feel like I need to defer.
Leonard, any thoughts?
I feel exactly the same way. I'm not a budget expert myself. I don't know what the priorities are for the OIG's office, nor CIPRA's office. So I really have to defer to what they think their priorities are. But then I understand also that the commission may want to have some input into the budgets too. So I think that's a conversation maybe that you guys all need to have together. But I appreciate you asking for the community's input. Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. I really appreciated the sort of the way it was framed from Ms. Grenage. The way I think about it, and again, this is my thoughts, but I would love to hear from everyone here, is I see the commission as really the ones who are really looking at the civilian oversight infrastructure or the structure. And the way, you know, if the OIG and the CPRA provide their priorities, I think our role would be to provide feedback, ask questions, and really keeping in mind the civilian oversight, you know, as a whole. So for me, it's not necessarily about making recommendations to delete this or add that, but it's more of, you know, tell the community what you're envisioning. How does that strengthen civilian oversight? And how can we either support, you know, if we need to, in advancing your budgets? That's sort of the way I'm thinking about it, but we'd love to hear your thoughts.
This reminds me of when we were asked to prioritize the IG's work. And it's kind of not, we're not able to do that. You know what I'm saying? She knows what the work is and how she can balance out the work that needs to be done. And it's almost the same here. It's the IG and the agency director work with their people, the people who do the work. They know how to innovate it and know what's needed. And I think the vice chair is right. They can prepare their budget submitted, and we would ask questions. And you know, why here and not there? Will that solve this problem or not? Things like that. So if the intent of this particular paragraph is to give us that opportunity by February 1st, just so we would agendize that and have them come before the commission, and the community would be there also asking questions. I see that as the intent. Who drafted this paragraph? Who submitted this?
Does anybody know?
It
So I
wasn't us.
I'm sorry. I think that this was a play off of the original. So there was an original paragraph here, and I don't have it up. I don't know if Commissioner Shea has it. I think there was just some changes maybe in the language or something like that. But I do recall that there was something about the budget previously, and it had to be submitted.
The only reason why I ask is that it's all blue, which
It
indicates
is all blue.
all new, not say just an edit like you see in the above number 9, where it's just a few words taken out. I'm just curious, what was the intent?
I have some thoughts about this structure, but Max had his hand up for a bit. Is this Mac, is your hand up on this point or something else?
Yeah, I'm pulling up the current ordinance does not speak to this specific issue, although I'm really remembering that this is a play on either something in the charter.
I think it's the charter.
This
You're
is the charter and the budget.
correct.
It's get charter moving in, right? Okay, so that's why it's blue. I will say to in response to the vice chair and the chair, I think that if the goal is to have us present this in a public forum in advance of submitting it to the city administration, perhaps the language would say that the agency director shall present the budget to the commission in a public forum prior to submitting it to the commission. And you can see that again, I'm looking in the chat, having OPD do the same. Perhaps you could invite budget director to walk along with that. But that the timeline doesn't seem as important as it just happening before we submit that to city administration. But IG would love your take on that.
Thank you, Director Muir. I just want to point this. I think that last year we had we had the budget department speak to kind of what this looks like, just because even though these are departmental budgets, it's the mayor's budget. And I remember there was quite a bit of back and forth about what could be said in public and what could not be said in public. So I think it may be helpful. I don't have an issue with this language. If first of all, I know it's the same exact language in the OIG section. So if we don't have an issue with this language, the particulars about what can and can't be said, I think we could do in the budget ad hoc, or ask somebody from budget to help to flesh that out about what can be said and what could reasonably be said, or things of that nature. I think outside of the date, just because the date is the moving target, it's really contingent upon the administration and not really us, unless the commission wants to write to Director Muir's point that we just want your priorities, and that's codified somewhere, versus we want your entire budget by February 1st.
So I'm going to make a few observations and then sort of make a suggestion. We know that from the charter and the ordinance here and the other sections here, the main structure of this is that the department heads submit their budgets to the commission, and the commission thereafter submits everyone's budget and commissions the CPRAs and the OIGs directly to the mayor as part of its budgetary submission. This permission to allow the agency director and the OIG to submit directly to the mayor as of April 1st is both a logistical check to make sure that a community organization does not, or structure does not hold up their submissions to the mayor, which is required, as well as provide a channel of independence in the event that there are issues between the department heads and the commission. I take as rather important the intent that Chair has identified, sort of a public presentation by the department heads of what their intent is with regards to the budget. I do also think that it's rather important, what Director Muir mentioned, having a presentation, perhaps a public presentation, not necessarily about line item budgets. I think that may get too much into the weeds, although I do think that budget at some point needs to be public. I think that a public conversation about priorities might be appropriate and would very well fit within the sort of goal of Measure L and S1 to have and bring public transparency to both the police department, but also the oversight agencies, specifically to the community, so they can understand what's going on and they can understand what it is that the agencies and each individual body is doing. February 1st seems to be a date that might work for those priorities. I'm hearing that a proposed budget would not work for February 1st, but perhaps priorities might for February 1st. I'm also hearing, though, that the proposed budget portion is a bit of a moving target, but having a deadline for when the proposed budget is submitted goes along with the commission's function of sort of packaging everything up, sort of doing whatever it is that the commission might do with respect to the budgets that are prepared, and then having it submitted to the city and the mayor's office and the city administrator by, it sounds like, April 1st, which means that, well, we all know that if the commission wants to do anything, it needs to do so either in public session or in a closed session, but specifically at Brown Act meetings, which means setting aside our March meetings for these conversations. So sort of working backwards from April 1st, that would give us, if there was a deadline to submit proposed budgets by March 1st to the commission, that would give the commission 2 sessions, 2 meetings in order to have discussions, meetings, conversations, or conversations, meetings, or discussions to sort of discuss those budgets and to finalize submission to the mayor and city administrator, which would need to happen by the last meeting in March. So, to our agency heads, I keep using department heads and agency heads interchangeably. I apologize if that's confusing. How does February 1st for budget priorities and March 1st for proposed budgets sound? And I guess March 1st, that date would be subject to, or have some language that would say, subject to the finance or budget departments getting the appropriate documents to you. I know we're playing this game where everyone wants to take as much time as they can with the budget and get as far down as possible, but then there are these hard deadlines that we got to work with. IG?
So I'm not trying to put a thorn in anybody's side, and I know that Director Mayer hasn't gone through this, but there is a balancing and juggling act as well with the city side. So we also, as department heads, have to do like a PowerPoint, and we do our budget during the budget. And I don't know if anybody else looked at it last year, but CPRA had to present their budget at the council meeting. OIG had to present their budget at the council meeting as well. So, and I'm not saying that I'm opposed to this by any means. For me, I just kind of want to take a look at what that timeline looked like last year before I can honestly give a substantive and just informed response to you, because it's just a lot of it really is a lot of work. It really honestly is when we hit budget season. And answering to finance and then the city administration answering to the commission, understanding that that's the structure and what it is, just being mindful of that, and providing the commission what they need, and then also providing the city administration what they need as well, without being super stressed. I know for me, budget season is a very stressful time, and I don't know how Director Mayer felt about it, but I didn't have any admin support, so I do the budget in the OIG myself, which is a really heavy lift. And it's not to boohoo me, but I just want to make sure that I can give you what you're asking for. And I don't want to write a check, honestly, that I can't catch.
It's not a no, so I'm okay with it for now. Matt?
I will co-sign the IG's statement. I think that I know that I'll have my hands over on every step that's taken with the budget cycle, and haven't received info from budget office, and that I think, as a side note, I understand there have been communication issues over time, but this has been the process as it has existed has been relatively successful. Oversight entities have grown, budgets have gone up. And I think that I can absolutely say providing budget priorities, very doable. And any hard date that's reliant on another city agency will be extremely subject to change.
Vice Chair, thoughts?
No, I think this is, listening to the IG saying she did it all by herself. Yet another, kudo for her. But honestly, this whole budget process last year, even for the commission, just totally fell apart. So if these dates work for you all, I have no further comment.
My only comment is I think it should be our responsibility as a commission, as a body, to provide that leadership and vision. And, we are in a lot of conversations. So really, again, holding the structure together. And I think hopefully, if we step out of the NSA, we are going to be in the spotlight, and we are going to have to be more strategic with how we talk about our work and our priorities and where, dollars are allocated, because it is taxpayer money. So everything that was said is fine with me. I don't have an issue with it, but I think it's a note for us on the commission that when it's budget season, we have to get ourselves together and really
Yeah.
understand what the
Right.
priorities are for civilian oversight as a whole.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, so many moving pieces, yes.
All right. Any further thoughts? I think that's a good place to pin this. At least we've done a good amount of discussion for both of this, as well as the IG section later on, as well as the commission's portion that I just went to go double check. Okay. All right. Mac, finally getting down to the getting there.
Yeah.
Pete, take us
Oh,
away.
well, thank you. For section H, it says any duties consistent with the agency's powers and duties as prescribed in section 604. It says assigned by commission is deleted. I understand the commission can assign tasks, so I don't think that's necessary to have in there. I can go down to 2.46050 unless anyone has questions about any other duties. But it's a healthy catch-all as far as I see it.
Well, since we're here, are there other duties that have been assigned by the commission in the history that you've been working here that have been inconsistent with the powers and duties in the charter?
Not inconsistent. I think that they're, yes, I mean, it's a broad purview. So I think this goes back to the language in the charter, which covers our investigative actions. And I think everything we're doing.
Okay. All right. And background checks, it looks like.
So regarding background checks, we have background checks being performed on all new agency staff and on the agency director before hiring. Historically, only complaint investigators and the agency director were subject to background checks, which left intake technicians and admin staff not receiving background checks. That was right. I can request a background check as I see fit, my understanding. But that was the specific prescription. And so just having all agency staff do the background check. And I believe, yeah, the city administrator's office shall retain an outside person or entity to perform these background checks. Naturally, my starting point for my staff is I'd prefer that an outside person do that background check as opposed to OPD. Verifying education and employment background, public record search information, criminal records, and that it appears that maybe there should be a C section for the agency director there. But the results of the background check for agency director go straight to the commission, and the results of background checks for candidates within the agency go to me as opposed to the commissioner or anyone else to preserve their personnel records.
I'm going to scroll up just a second to double check something. Oh, I guess not. I thought that there was a section that talked about background check for the agency director, and I'm trying to figure out whether that's in the charter or not. I'm going to take a quick check. Does anybody have anything on this particular section?
I don't.
Nope.
I have a question. This might be to broader Oakland, City of Oakland hiring, but When in the hiring process is the background check done?
There's one step where you have a conditional offer. So
Yeah.
you'll say, I offer the letter conditional on you passing your background check. There's a series of approvals. 4 or more people have to approve that process, and then you send to the city administrator's office and say, I'd like a background check for this person. Then they send it to the outside background check folks. 3 to 10 days. They come back, you get the information. There's about 15 categories. And then they will say, this person cleared backgrounds, and you get those results. And then you provide a final offer letter, which is essentially memorializing that they passed the background check. And then there's a bunch of approvals in between there, those steps as well.
Okay. Good. I was wondering where Oakland was on Ban the Box and where exactly the background check is. That sounds like a good piece or part. Perhaps, Mac, I'm looking and I see charter sections about background checks, but not so much about the agency director. So perhaps by the next meeting, you'll check for us to see if there is and whether we need to include a section C here.
Okay.
And I'll just make a small note here. Mediation program.
Great.
Oh, Kathy Leonard.
So in this section, I think about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 or 7 lines down. It says the chief and agency director shall agree upon the type of cases that can be referred to mediation, the guidelines regarding the process, including but not limited to confidentiality and agreement of the parties to participate. My question, what happens if the chief and the agency director do not agree upon the type of cases that can be referred to mediation? If they can't agree, then is there the commission, somebody else who comes in and says, okay, I'm the tiebreaker, I'm going to make the decision? Just wondering what happens in that instance if they don't agree. Thank you.
Ms. Grenage, would you like to go next, or I can answer that question?
Well, I can add my question, then you can maybe answer both of them. My issue has to do with the nature of any settlement. My understanding of the program in San Francisco is that there is no discipline possible in mediation as a way of encouraging officers to participate and making sure that there's no legal aspect to the mediation in terms of the officer being represented by attorneys. So the word settlement is very, I need an understanding about what that means. Thank you.
Got it. So to answer the first question, the agreement between the chief and the agency director is about the parameters for the program. And I would say this is really just defining the scope of which cases are eligible for mediation. The only there could be different reasons. The chief and I might have different reasons for which types of cases we find should be eligible and should not be. But mediation is a voluntary process. It would be for officers, certainly as for the community members. And The only situation in which I think you need an arbiter for that agreement is if the chief is just refusing to mediate any complaints at all. I think you need the commission to ask for like a reasonable articulation for a failure to accept certain boundaries or the types of cases. But I don't. This is describing just building the framework for the program, and that once that framework is built, there will just be an MOU that reflects those guidelines.
How do you resolve any conflicts that are ambiguous within those parameters or frameworks? Or how would a mediation program resolve anything? So for instance, if the framework is written very broadly and says any, I don't know, any use of force that's under a level 4 or under a level 3 or lower, but it doesn't say anything about how many instances previously. So you come across a person who has 30 previous uses of a level 3 use of force, the majority of which, I know I'm starting to create a parallel.
No,
yeah.
Your point is taken, and I mean, fortunately, we have about $120,000 of grants per year that are about to start coming in for building the parameters for this program, much of which is borrowed from the IG's report of March of last year, in terms of envisioning the various headaches that come with finding which cases are eligible for mediation, what's appropriate to be mediated. And what I can say is that that just will be sussed out prior to the actual mediation of cases, right? And in any given city, decisions, as Ms. Grenache was saying, about what does the case get resolved, what does that resolution look like, how is it tracked? I know that a frustration for some staff in New York was that when our cases were mediated, you lost track of the allegations. They weren't aggregated in a very useful way. In some states, if a mediation falls apart, let's say the officer and the complainant meet and are unable to resolve their complaint, what happens next? Does it go back to investigation or not? And what is the agreement? How are you, if you are sitting there with an officer and you say, hey, I really feel understood and I don't want to go forward with the process, how do you memorialize that in a way that is useful to you, the individual mediating, and the entity trying to relay that something meaningful took place? All that's going to be in the fine print. This is, from as I read it, this is saying there must be an agreement on the parameters of this program, and my interpretation is that it's incumbent on the CPRA to present the framework for that, and for the chief to go forward, for the CPRA to present that to the commission and other stakeholders, and then for the chief to say whether they have any gripes and then resolve those.
IG, I see your hand up. Just give me 1 second. Mac, what about this sentence that's right here that says both the chief and agency director must approve of any settlement offer before it's proposed? So that assumes that a framework has been built out and someone's going through the mediation process and they figured out a settlement offer and there's some sort of disagreement, perhaps one that, I don't know, it could be that CPRA decides that the discipline's not enough, or that the settlement offer is not sufficient.
So I will just note that there is no discipline in mediation processes ever in the US. And there are a bunch of due process issues. If there's a mediation, it is an agreement to have a non-disciplinary conversation with, while it's in the mediation process, that you don't, that it's not the complainant or the community member negotiating with the officer over what their discipline would be, and that the substance of that mediation is confidential. We won't know about it. Maybe the staff who's assigned to sit in will know about it, but they won't be reporting about it, the incident, in any sort of public way. So the term settlement offer here is, I would suspect, subject to just the original drafting of this ordinance, perhaps somebody's personal knowledge of how mediations work. And it's more reflective of like mediation in the professional sort of corporate sense than how it works in civilian oversight. So there is an agreement that a case is resolved with through mediation or not, but there's only two options in that sense.
I would suggest that the word resolution would be better than settlement.
That sounds fantastic. And further, I would say,
Go ahead.
I would say both the chief and the agency must approve of any resolution before a case is closed. Thoughts, IG? I know you've done a lot of research on this.
No, I want to commend you for your explanation. Spot on for the education. And also to your point, I think folks that may have drafted this don't necessarily know the language. I personally think agreement would be better because you can get to a resolution that doesn't fare well, right? Like we have exhausted everything. We have resolved the conversation, this, that, and the third, but now we haven't come to an agreement. So we need to move forward with the process. To your point, going back to, okay, I'm the complainant and CPRA Director Mayor, I'm not comfortable with where we are. I don't like this officer's attitude or whatever the case may be. I would like to move forward with my complaint, and I want it to be appropriately investigated. So I think an agreement on to have both the chief and the agency director to have an agreement with whatever the mediation, the size of the mediation is, that means that we are in alignment with where we are, whatever that is, because an officer could pull out at any time, right? To Director Muir's point, this is voluntary. They don't have to go into mediation, and we need to make that, very clear. An officer maybe, I don't want to talk to them. I think they're in the wrong, and I'm going to fight this case, and I'm going to beat it. So, I mean, either way, to Director Muir's point, what will be flushed out and sussed out after this is just kind of a guide point. Like, we need a mediation program, but there will be so much granular detail. This will also, at some point, probably have to go to meet and confer. It will have to be codified not only in the policy manual for CPRA, but also probably potentially a DGO for OPD, because you need something that governs, kind of OPD as well, so that their folks know that these are options and what these are, similar to the ICR, the informal complaint resolution process that OPD has now. So to that point, there will be a lot of communications as Director Muir gets his funding, gets his consultants, and craft this and build this out and make proposed edits to that policy and how this program will be governed. And then I think it's probably, in my opinion, to have something for you guys to look at and then have these questions at that time. I think it'll just be harder to try to forecast what it might be.
Thank you for that. Chair?
Yes, as someone who has done mediations, I would say it is more of an agreed resolution rather than settlement, because it is what the parties, even though maybe it's, if they hadn't gone to mediation, some other kind of mandated resolution would have occurred, but a mediation is something that the parties agree to that might be more creative or outside the box. So an agreed resolution. That both parties, in other words, it speaks to the agreement between the parties. And it's not a precedent setting. It is something that is as between those parties under that set of facts.
Any other thoughts, comments on this? Oh, there was a
Just-
second question, right? That Rashida had, or was that answering?
That was it.
That was it. Okay, so then
Who's editing the document as we're going along?
that's me.
I'm sorry?
It's me.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Are we whole on those two questions and the ensuing discussion? I feel like we are, but just wanted to make sure.
I'm good.
Okay. Onward. Mac last section, public ethics. Oh, there were no changes.
This is really, if I remember right, that we can file a public ethics complaint. Oh no, shall have the authority to investigate allegations. I will just note that in practice, this is if we don't receive the records that we want, pursuant to the charter in the prior chapter, there can be a public ethics complaint. In practice, I think there's a number of enforcement paths. It's good to have in writing, but there's a pretty significant delay on their investigative abilities that limits the impact of this section.
Thoughts, questions? IG?
I'm only talking about it now because I know the language is exactly the same in 4.7, so we don't have to talk about it again in 4.7. To Director Muir's point, there are several issues that severely limit our ability. I know right now I'm going through it with the cost for service and CAD data from OPD. I made this request in October, and the charter actually says 10 business days, but I give a little bit of grace given the fact that I know that we have systems that are quite old. So I know for me, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, lines of communication, I always do a follow-up regarding where we are. And I think that that might be something that, of course, again, doesn't necessarily have to be memorialized here. But in a policy manual, standard operating procedures, something that if information has not been provided, do at least give grace and give a follow-up so that there can be a meeting, what's going on, because there may be some technical issues where the information cannot be extracted for whatever reason, i.e. The ransomware attack or something like that.
Sorry. What is it that you're asking? I understand what you're saying, but is there specific language, or are you just saying as a practice tip, this is what we're doing?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's just for an FYI informational purposes. I don't know if anybody cares about the alignment with the charter or not, with the charter saying 10 days, here saying 15, to potentially initiate an ethics complaint or not, but this is just for informational purposes. I don't have any specific changes to the language. I don't care either way regarding 15 days or 10 days.
I do think if the charter says 10 days, that the ordinance should be consistent with the charter.
Yeah, I don't think we have the ability to, in this thing that we're doing here, that we can change the charter, if I'm not mistaken. I think we have to follow the charter language.
Correct. I agree with you, Chair. The issue is that I think to Ms. Rashida's point, if we're going to fix it to make it in alignment with the charter may have been updated when this was older. So and I can drop in there where it is in the charter.
Okay.
I think we could just square up the language at some point. I've made a note to look into it. Anything else, Mac? I saw your hand.
No, I think that part of the IG's comment actually is reflected in that there is the 10-day requirement, there is a little bit of a grace period, and that this really just this is, although it's in section 2.46, this is about the Public Ethics Commission authority. And it just says that they could be involved. Makes me wonder whether that should be in their section as opposed to ours, but that's another story.
Going to mute the chair. I beg your forgiveness. And let's turn to 2.47. I have control. 604F2. I have control of the slider, Michelle. So we've been going line by line, if that's okay with you. Just start talking whenever you're ready.
I think that this is kind of self-explanatory regarding the definitions. I didn't necessarily see any definitions that needed to be added, but if there are any definitions that any others feel like should be added, please feel free to say something, but I didn't necessarily think that there were any that were missing or that needed to be defined in this area.
What about agency director? Is the director of the Community Police Review Agency? Is there a definition for agency director in there?
So I'm not quite sure if we referenced the agency director in the IG section.
I think there's a part about.
I am so sorry. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no, you bet.
I stepped out. We're in your section now. Forgive me.
No, you're fine. You could have been right. I couldn't really remember. I was like, I know we referenced the agency, but I didn't know if we specifically referenced the agency.
No.
Excuse my scrolling. I'm just checking very quickly if there is a reference.
Mm-hmm.
Not seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any good thought though? Good thought though, Chair. Anything else on definitions?
So I know some of this information was removed from 2.45. Some information did not get added in this section. And I had sent out, when I was sick, I sent out kind of some notes, kind of outlining what my thoughts were around some of the information in the sections. I know that the commission had quite a few questions on this section. I couldn't answer some of the other sections from the commission's notes in 2.47. What does oversee mean? Are we approving or recommend? One, because I didn't really have any context and I wasn't quite sure of that language. So I just wanted to go back and look. Before, like I said previously, the OIG or the Inspector General was created by ordinance or was going to be created by ordinance. So the direction and the information and what was going to guide the OIG's work as an agency would have been directed by the commission. But when the voters went back to the ballot, to Director Muir's point previously, our functions and duties are codified in the charter. So that's where that one line kind of comes from. The OIG is established by charter versus previously when it wasn't in the charter and it was only an ordinance. I think this is kind of self-explanatory. This first portion, budget, civil service employees, that's in alignment with the charter. So there are no changes there. The Inspector General shall be subject to background checks. Any reports, plans, audits, reviews, and recommendations generated by the OIG shall not disclose information in violation of state, local law, any things of that nature. So does anybody have any questions or issues in 2.47020, creation?
I'm going to scroll up I'm going to give everyone an opportunity to look here. And then I'm also going to scroll up to 145.110 because that's where
Mm.
some of this originally came from. And was the section where it came from being moved from, I guess is the best way to say it. Some of it got transferred one for one, some of it did not, so excuse me. So this was what was in the original enabling ordinance. The first paragraph talked about hiring. So that ended up not being needed anymore. The background check language that's at the end of it was added to section, the last section there, section D. And I will show you, scroll down so everyone sees it. Oh, sorry about all the scrolling text. Oh, goodness. That was C right there. A, B, and D come from, I think, also the same. Let's see. I know that from this section that there is a training section that's later in the IG sections.
Mm.
I know that there is the C section, shall report to the commission and may only be removed according to civil service rules and applicable MOU. That section didn't make it to the new sections, right?
Do we want to discuss or?
I think, I imagine there is some specific legal ramifications for that section not being there. And what, if any, do you see the ramifications being?
I was about to say, where did it go? Because you were scrolling. And I lost
Sorry, I was
Is
scrolling
that-
trying to see if there was like should I just finish off the rest of it or just talk about this now?
No, I lost my footing. Previously, all the positions in the OIG's office, including the inspector general, would have been civil service. Again, to your point, that's it's illegal to have illegal in this sense, labor laws, to have an agency director that is under civil service, even a deputy director. We're having some challenges, and I'm sure Director Muir can probably speak to this when we're talking about trying to get either a deputy director, CPRA, and a deputy inspector general. It's challenges because those positions are usually historically not classified as civil service, but because the charter says that those positions are. And again, because the charter was updated, this language is now defunct because the charter says everybody but the agency director and inspector general should be civil service. And that's why that's removed.
There's a portion of this, so that accounts for the second half of
The
the
second
sentence,
portion.
right?
Yes.
What about the first portion? Shall report to the commission.
So we had communications about this, kind of back and forth about it. What does report mean versus what does oversee mean? And Vice Chair, we've had this conversation as well. When you have someone that reports to you, you're giving them like day-to-day direction. Like, okay, I have people that report to me. We touch base. I need you to get this done. These are the deliver this, that, and the third, the day-to-day operation versus oversee to make sure on a larger scale that, okay, the IG is getting these things done. We're getting the deliverables there within the charter versus the day-to-day operations. And because it states the inspector general is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the OIG, to kind of allow the agency directors to kind of run their agency versus the commission to kind of tell them or direct them as a direct report in that sense to do this or what's this and that. Because if you're not you in particular, but if the commission is constantly, asking for this or asking for that, our duties are outlined in the charter. So we have to do that at some point. We have to be able to run the agency in accordance with the charter. It doesn't preclude the body to vote, as you all do, to within whatever jurisdiction that the IG's office has to do their work. Like if you want to vote to have the inspector general to do an audit of use of force use of force investigations in the last 6 months from IAD. You know, we want to vote. We want to take a look at that IG. I need you to prioritize that. We want that voted on. That's not an issue. It doesn't preclude the commission from doing that.
So I
But
know,
that was, go ahead.
finish, please.
No, that was the sense of the conversations that were had around that language.
I noticed that you mentioned oversee, and that's something that is from 604 from the charter.
charter.
It specifically says oversee the work of the agency and the OIG as one of the powers and duties of the commission. And I want to first off acknowledge that this is probably a very tricky conversation for you to have specifically, there being this very specific power dynamic here as commissioners and commissioners sort of having the power to both hire and fire. And I fully
Correct.
understand that this is a hard conversation. This is a very
Absolutely.
difficult conversation.
Absolutely.
And I want to recognize and I thank you for being open and sort of talking about it because, like I said, this is a very hard conversation. The difference between overseeing and reporting, I get what you're saying there, but if the language says oversee the work of the agent, well, let's cut out the agency for a sec. Oversee the work of the OIG. How is that different than what you described about sort of being involved in the day-to-day?
So overseeing is overseeing the larger picture, right? So the IG's office is supposed to do reports. Is the IG's office producing reports? Is the IG's office producing reports and making sure that those reports are made public in accordance with the ordinance? Yes, the IG has provided the police commission 10 reports in this fiscal year. Okay, check. Versus IG, when is this report going to be due? IG, can you go over this report with me? IG, well, I have a question really quickly about this one. Well, wait a minute. When is this report going to be done? Well, are you working on that report too? And it's like, well, wait, it's one thing to be able to tend to the commission as a body, and make sure that we're still getting the work done. It's a whole nother thing to be, in my opinion, commission staff, meaning that I am answering to the commit, like, hey, Michelle, I have a quick question. When is the National Oversight Week? I'm sorry, what? Those types of things. And I say this because those things happened. And I was getting kind of phone calls and I'm like, I have to do what the charter requires that I do first. And if there is a different alignment or prioritization that the commission as a body would like me to refocus and prioritize, okay, commission as a body, vote and do that, versus I'm getting a call from Commissioner Shea and you have a question about this. Then I'm getting a call from Vice Chair Ordaz who may have a separate question, or alternate Commissioner Garcia Casa and he has another question, or Commissioner Rouse. You're spreading your agency directors too thin, and there's a requirement for them to do the day-to-day functions of and I'll just say the IG's office, where if I'm pulled away at the beck and call of the commission, then who is ensuring that the functions of the IG's office is getting done?
When I sometimes think about overseeing the work, I also sometimes think about overseeing to me feels like a supervising, but in a not in the informal like manager to employee relationship, but much more like from a more formal structure, right? And I think that comes from sort of getting the reports and getting the information. But I think there's an aspect of it which is also not saying that this is any of the work that you've produced, but I think of maybe 5-10 years down the line, we may have a different IG, we may have a different commission. And the work product that's coming from the IG in that future iteration, perhaps is not quite up to the same level that yours is. And we wonder, well, where is this coming from? What is this? Is this particular IG? Is it the policies and procedures or the operating protocols that
Mhm.
the IG's office has? Does it come from some other aspect of it that requires an oversight body like the commission, which oversees the agency as well? Sorry, I keep saying agency, OIG, to sort of look into some of these things, right? And that some of that may require the IG to report on those additional things that are outside of your normal reporting duties. What does a commission do in that particular situation if we don't have reporting on the one hand, but we also just have the language that says oversee the work?
I think that that's a great point, and that's why one thing I've historically said, and I continue to say, and I actually suggested the language too. How does the commission interact with the IG's office? Since I've been here, and I'm just going to be very candid, it's like, well, IG, tell us what you want us to do, and then it's like, well, that you report to me. So it's kind of like, well, if we're going to have a conversation and build this relationship out, this is what I foresee. I'm very thankful that Vice Chair was amenable to the OIG ad hoc, because that's a place where we can talk about that. So if there's like, okay, IG, you said that you would be able to get this. What's going on? That communication. Everybody knows I have no problem being very open and transparent, to your point, with where that is, but that's not an everyday thing. That's something is out of whack. You are not in alignment with your duties, roles, and responsibilities, right? You are not up to par with what we have given you as far as expectations as a professional go. So now we're triggering an issue as the people who are responsible to oversee and ensure that you deliver on your mandate. So now we have to have a separate type of conversation. But allowing an agency director to do their job that they were hired to do, and overseeing and be like, okay, she's pounding these out. Okay, we have a question. Bring it to the OIG ad hoc. There's some questions that are coming from the commission regarding your report. Do you not mind elaborating in greater detail after you've presented it in public within the confines of the law? So that's how I see that. And I absolutely agree. If there is a reason for IG is, whatever, and there needs to be a verbal counseling or whatever, you absolutely have that. And I'm not saying you have that authority, I'm giving it to you. But that's well within the commission right to ensure that. And I'll stop there. I see Ms. Rashida's hands up.
Ms. Kanash?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that I think there are two issues that relate to this conversation that should probably be addressed. One of them is the evaluation protocol. I think some of the issues that have been of concern can be reflected in the evaluation instrument that is developed. And that would provide a matrix of the kind of performance measures that, and other things as well, communication style, whatever, that you feel are important to that job that need to be evaluated. And so I think that some of this conversation should find its way into that discussion that will result in the performance evaluation tool. Also, it should be remembered that the commission and its agencies are all subject to review by an auditor every 2 or 3 years. I can't remember which it is. And that audit, independent external audit, would also reflect any areas of lack of coordination or lack of appropriate integration between the commission and its agencies. So I think those two venues also provide mechanisms that address some of the issues that are being discussed. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I wonder if, and again recognizing that this is a public space and there is this weird power dynamic as I'm asking you to answer some of these questions. I wonder if there is something else, or if there are other concerns that you have that would that are having you take this position. And I'm not trying to attach a judgment to it in any ways, but just to say that you would support removing this language. I'm hearing the sort of like, I'm getting all of these calls that are a little bit outside of my job duties, answering questions of commissioners. I have very, very poorly summarized that. Let me just say that. But let me just sort of say it like that and just move on. Are there others? Are there other areas of concern?
The
If
word
any.
has absolutely been weaponized towards me, and I'm just going to be honest. Who are you, IG? You report to the commission. Highly inappropriate to utilize that. I think words have meaning, and I've said that. Overseeing, I think, is, in my opinion, is a more appropriate word for the dynamic of the commission and its role. And if I'm wrong, I have no problem saying that, but it's not like an auditor reporting to the chief of audits, in my opinion. To your point, a supervisor versus a manager. If you hire an agency director to do their job, to Ms. Rashida's point, there should be mechanisms in place to ensure that that's done. And I think that how you all hold us accountable to making sure that we're getting that work done is via our reporting out at the police commission meetings to show from this meeting to that meeting, this is what's being done, this is where we are. And then those questions of the commissioners, IG, can you answer this, or where are we at with that? And can we get if I'm comfortable with answering this in this space, yes. Otherwise, I can follow up with you offline. I think those are the accountability mechanisms for the IG's office to make sure that we are in alignment with what at least the charter says, and then our standard operating procedures. And whenever the commission provides their evaluative tool and their expectations, then that too.
I think I have harassed you for long enough. I'm going to turn it to some others. I saw hands in the order of Agency Director Muir, Mac, Marcia, and then Corelli. Chair and Vice Chair.
Chair and Vice Chair, if you want to go first.
Well, I would say we do have a little bit of a conundrum here, because the word oversight, I think, was always intended to be supervision. But I think what the IG has expressed about what happened to her in the past was a type of supervision that she considered inappropriate and mishandled and was kind of brutalized. But if we step back from that, having experienced, I would say, the lowest kind of interaction with her office, and look at Jesse's suggestion that we look at it past your occupying the office, Michelle, but some future IG who is not as skilled and experienced. Okay, Ms. Rashida put in the chat that oversight wasn't meant to be supervision. Where do we get that interpretation? Is that somewhere in the legislative history of how S1 was drafted? Obviously, we are writing for the first time an enabling article dealing with the IG, because we didn't have that before, if I'm not mistaken. But what is all this crossing out of the blue language and where is the new language?
Uh,
Because
I
when
have some of it track, Chair, that I can, in a separate document that I can share with you, or as we walk through it down below.
right,
That'd be helpful, yeah.
because if oversight isn't the right word, and we do use oversight with the agency director, if I'm not mistaken, but if oversight isn't the right word for the IG, why isn't it the right word? In as much as other direct reports maybe.
I'm gonna interrupt for just a second. Oversight is the word that is in the charter. It is the word that we're operating off of. It's the report word that is the issue. And actually, you bring up a separate issue that I will eventually bring up, which is the enabling ordinance in other sections says the CPRA director reports to the commission. But the charter only says, and I wonder if we should be making all of those unified together.
Correct.
Clear that up, yeah.
I'm just trying to understand why one is treated one way, one is treated a different way. And I am very sensitive to an understanding about some of the interaction between the IG and the previous leadership, but we can't lose sight that this is language that goes beyond the present IG, and we're trying to capture what is the correct relationship. What does oversight mean? What does supervision mean? And I think that's what we're trying to get a handle on without it being personalized in any way. Oh, of course, Michelle, you can respond. We knew this would be a delicate conversation. Jesse said it would be, so we can be just as honest as we can be right now. And corrections are and interpretations are important right now.
So no, I thank you so much for that, Chair. I think the problem is the relationship between CPRA and the commission, and the relationship between the OIG and the commission is different. The CPRA is written into ordinances and written into the charter where they are codependent upon the commission in a way that the OIG is not. Because an OIG is supposed to be a separate and independent entity just by nature. That's what IG's offices are historically. And they are different. So, and the reason I say that is CPRA for certain 604G3 provisions must get approval from the commission, right? So there is a codependency there in order for the way that it's written now, and I know that they're working on it, CPRA, to the commission can vote to direct CPRA to open up complaints that they otherwise don't have to do under their mandate in the charter. Whether it's a public complaint that does not fall within the 5 mandated categories, or an internal complaint that they think is important to the members of the public. The CPRA director is also the contract administrator to the commission in a way that the OIG is not. So there is a different staff dynamic. And I'm just going to be very frank, like the OIG can operate separate and apart without that need. So I can, and I'll just say with the audit plan, I can, of course, comment, this is the audit plan, is there feedback, this, that, and third, but the charter says the Office of the Inspector General is supposed to audit the 52 tasks of the NSA. Got it, on it, there we go. So when you hire an agency director, they should be able to direct their agency in a way that they can get the work done. Where I think Director Mears said this a couple of meetings ago, there is the way that the CPRB was, they were staffed to, yes, there we go. The way that the CPRB was, they were staffed, or the agency director or the CPRB director and those entities that worked for that individual were the staff to the CPRB in a way that it's still kind of translated, in my opinion, to the CPRA. But the way that we can kind of interpret it is that there are two separate entities. We are department heads. And then they treat the commission as a department with its own separate budget. So now you have these three entities that are kind of lumped together in a way that isn't necessarily organic, which then that's why we have these challenges. It wasn't a big deal when it was the CPRA because you only had one agency director who could help assist. But when you have two, it's like, well, why are we treating this one different? You're treating that one different because the charter says that you have, or the charter and the ordinance gives certain responsibilities to the CPRA because it was in existence before the OIG was. So I'll stop. And I see Director Muir and Vice Chair hand up as well.
I think.
And I haven't put my hand down. I still have more questions, but go to the Vice Chair.
Okay.
Thank you. I think my thoughts have evolved after I keep hearing the conversation and the way it's going. So bear with me as I wrap my brain around this. I think the first thing is I do want to acknowledge how we got here and, you know, the challenges with the past leadership and the way they did business. I do think that we should not forget about that and use that as a guide so that we're not back there again, regardless of who's here and who's not, because that was completely inappropriate. That said, I think for me, one of the things that keeps coming up for me is the need to have an executive director. We have 3 agency directors, as I understand it, that are supposed to, again, I'm going to use the word report, but that may not be the right word to use in this context, with, you know, 3, and OPD is sort of quasi, it's not, because I understand OPD reports to the mayor, to the city administrator. So when we have sort of 3 bodies of work that the commission is supposed to oversee, it's really difficult to do that when one does not have the ability to provide input or even ask questions. You know, I heard you, IG, mention, you know, sort of the challenges around having individuals on a commission raise questions. I think for me, that gives me a little bit of anxiety because, one, I am not a subject matter expert, right? And that was well known when I was selected by the mayor and then by the selection panel. So I do have questions, and I don't know whether I've called you out of the blue, and I know that wasn't around me, but like, I would want the ability to call and ask before I make a decision that has an impact. So I think that piece I wanna, and we don't have to talk about it here, but like the whole piece around reaching out and asking for questions, because you are the expert, and understanding, you know, the expertise that you bring, and then also understanding the expertise that we bring, right? Whether it's, you know, us now or the commissioners in the future. I do think it's important for there to be consistency between CPRA and OIG. Again, as I've understood this is, you know, there's sort of like 2 arms. One is the left, one is the right. If that's not the right way we should be thinking about it, I want to have that conversation and I want to understand how we should be thinking about it based on best practice. And I think the last piece for me is this work is not sustainable the way it currently is. We need an executive director who can actually be the head of the department, whether that's the, you know, the whole civilian oversight structure or the commission. But the way it currently is set up, it is a lot of work for volunteers, especially as we're thinking about direct reports. It's just not sustainable. So for me, what's really coming up to mind is we need that sort of full-time person to do the reporting, and we can focus on the direction, strategy, policy. And I think the way it is now, because we don't have that extra layer, we have to do both. And I think that's where it gets tricky.
Well, that's a whole new set of problems, processes, and procedures, because that was brought up before. Without commission prep if you will, and it fell apart. So I don't know that we can, I don't know if that requires some sort of charter amendment to allow us to have an executive director and set ourselves up in that fashion. And I've never tried to seek any charter amendment. So I would have to defer to Ms. Rashida and Ms. Leonard about thoughts on having an executive director, but that's not what we're doing, I don't think, right now. But I hear you, Vice Chair. I definitely hear you.
So I see that Director Mears back, or on screen, not back, but on screen, and about to sort of put in his piece. I'm gonna, I know, Chair, you had a little bit more. Is it okay if I take Director Muir and then we save this conversation for the next meeting and then talk a little bit about sort of when that next meeting is?
Absolutely. Time does get away, doesn't it? Okay.
Especially when you're talking about very important things.
Yes.
Mac?
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair, I will continue to strongly support the idea of having a director, which is a multi-year plan if there were to be an agency director for the commission alone. But I will side note, having a policy analyst who answers those questions directly could be a stopgap measure. I just wanted to note, in my experience working with and for other oversight entities, a dynamic that I'm aware of that exists across the country when it comes to like the policy unit for any oversight entity, and usually the IG and the CPRA equivalent don't have this exact type of relationship, and we're treading down that path. But I think that what I see, and I have heard concerns from other jurisdictions, is that oftentimes when there is a board or a commission, that the policy staff, and I know this was true in New York, ends up being the Q&A host for the board. And I do want to just say out loud that that's a dynamic that is created across the country, and it's a challenge when you have volunteer entities and you have an expert and you have policy experts who they're saying, I have a work plan or I have something I need to get done, and I just spent 3 days answering questions that didn't quite line up with that, with what I actually need to get done. So like, I just hope we can honor the IG's point there. It is a problem that the structure of civilian oversight naturally creates. And because at the CPRA, I mean, so often I can be like, this is personnel information, I can't discuss it. And I see that the commission sort of takes for granted so much of our work is confidential until there's the juncture where I need to reach out and ask about next steps, or when there's a presentation to the commission. Just wanted to acknowledge that that dynamic is not unique to Oakland. It is unique to this particular structure because the structure is unique. But beyond that, I do want to appreciate the IG's note when it comes to reporting versus oversight. It is in the way that a CEO reports to a board. One is always asking oneself, am I reporting to this individual person or to the entity itself? And I think that at any juncture that I can encourage ways that the commission can see itself as an entity that oversees us, as opposed to the individual relationships that might sometimes prevail over the unity of the commission. I think that oversight makes a lot of sense for me, in a broader policy sense. And I will just second also the IG's comments. We replaced the city administrator's office as the commission replaced the city administrator's office, to my understanding, because there were concerns about the city administrator's office having impacts on CPRA investigations. and that was not an independent way of doing things. And I sense that it was avoiding the hand of the city administrator was more of the point of moving this into an independent structure, as to re-envisioning what the reporting or oversight relationship might be. That's my thought there.
Michelle, 2 minutes, and then we talk about scheduling.
Sure, I probably don't need a whole 2 minutes. I think this kind of just honestly goes back to my question when I first started. The expectations of the commission. Is the commission doing more than it is required to do? You know, are they spreading themselves thin, interpreting some of this language in a way where we're supposed to do all of this, we're supposed to do all of this? I honestly, some of the stuff that you guys do, I quite frankly don't think you need to do. You know, I think that there is a level of the subject matter experts need to do this. And I don't have a problem with answering questions to Vice Chair's point. That's not what I was saying. I just need a mechanism of communication so that I'm not constant, you know, call, or this person calls and that person stops and then this, that. And that's why I suggested an ad hoc, so that there is a transition of communication. I absolutely understand that you all are not the subject matter experts. I have no problem answering questions that are subject to the work. I think we've had some really great conversations. That's not what I'm saying. I think putting a mechanism in place so that flow, you know, we have these, I'm very much excited about the OIG ad hoc. I've been asking for it, and I think that's a way for us to get to the granular level. And I have a set of commissioners that we can really drill down on in an appropriate time, so that we can do the other work. Because yes, we are overseeing report to the commission, but we have so many obligations to the city council. Not to take the shine, and Director Mayor talked about this, but he has to report to city council on some things. And we're asked to report to city council too. So just because we are reporting or overseen by this other structure, we still have to deal with the city administrator. We still have to deal with the city council. It doesn't preclude our responsibilities as practitioners and public servants that are still city employees. So that is just an extra added layer. And I don't know if everybody or it even knows or takes that into consideration. So that's kind of where I am, that like, we can do this. Can we just have a little bit of structure to how frequently? And that's why I'm really big on processes and bylaws, procedures, policies that kind of govern how we do the business. Thank you, Commissioners.
I think that was 3 minutes. Okay. All right. So I believe that next Monday is a holiday for our city staff. I would like they both work very hard, and I would like for them to be able to take their time off, regardless of whether or not they are actually taking time off. So I would propose, and I know that that we consider either canceling or moving next week's meeting. Thoughts? Oh, right. We should also, Marcia, what's the word on our timeline?
Yeah, this is going to run into some things. So next week is the week of the 19th, and that's President's Day. The 20th, Tuesday the 20th. Could we move it to Tuesday the 20th? Because we start having our interviews. Corelli can speak more to that schedule with the police chief. But I think Tuesday's the only day that would work for me.
Let's not use hands. Let's just all chime in when you chime in, please.
I'm presenting to city council on this mediation program on Tuesday, and I don't know when the council meeting is right now.
Mr. Naj is also not available on Tuesday.
Not available on Tuesday. Okay.
Tuesday's bad for me too.
Okay, Tuesday's bad for you too.
And then
Mm.
Wednesday's not going to work for me either.
And Wednesday doesn't work for you either. And then
And
of
then
course
Thursday is our meeting, right?
is meeting.
Oh
And then
gosh.
Friday's bad for me as well.
Oh gosh, sucks. I think we have to cancel next week.
We just have to count next week.
That's
I think-
okay. That'll give us
Yeah.
some time to do some work and some
Yeah.
thinking. Also perhaps a little bit of thoughts on our commission initiated suggestions on some of the ordinance changes. Maybe we can put some offline work in on that. And of course, you, chair and vice chair, you both have lots of interviews to do. So I think it's okay.
And at what point do you want us to have that conversation of commission driven suggested
I'm
edit?
gonna, it strikes me that we're probably gonna have at least one more meeting on 2.47. I'm sorry if I increased your anxiety level a lot there, IG. Just so that we can, because I think it's long overdue, some of these conversations about structure.
Yes.
And exactly how we expect it to work. And we also need to think about the fact that we're setting it for all future iterations to come.
Yes.
And so I do think that's a long conversation. So perhaps, so I think it'll be the meeting after that that we start talking about those commission initiated ones. Michelle?
This has nothing to do with 2.47. While I was sick, I was thinking about this. I know the Ethics Commission had some amendments to some of the language in 2.45. I'm not quite sure if the commission has engaged or discussed or talked to anyone regarding that, as they are the investigative entity that's supposed to look into some of this. Now, it's somewhere in 2.45. I can't remember specifically where. But it dawned on me, I know Commissioner Shea had asked previously who we might need to engage, and it happened when I was sick. So my apologies, not sure if anyone engaged with the executive director over there or not.
We'll put a bit of a pin on that question and think about that. Any other thoughts on scheduling?
So are we,
It's looking like we're canceling next week and then going to meet again the following week, which I believe is February 26th.
okay.
And hopefully what I will also ask is, it's weird of me to ask to chair this, but perhaps a bit of an update on how the other agencies, entities, and council people think about our timeline as it's going, and whether we're still okay. Or need to speed it up.
I haven't heard anything, and I think I need to check in maybe every week with them so they don't do something precipitous.
Much appreciated. I know there's a lot on your plate.
That's okay.
Let's see. Okay then. Thank you all. Thank you all for very good discussion. Hope it was okay. And we'll
Thanks,
see you all.
Jesse.
We'll see you all again on February 26th.
Night,
Thanks,
everybody.
Jesse. Appreciate
Thanks so
it.
much.
Everyone,
Have a great-
have a good week.
Have a
Thank you
night.
all.